Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast. My name is Kevin Olenek. You could, of course, follow me at KEVOLE. Find me on Facebook, Kevin Olenek, TikTok, etc. All social media is KEVOLE. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, which is iTunes, Google, Spotify, etc., etc. And last week, the CFL came forward, as we know, as we're going through the pandemic and times of sitting alone. The CFL had their draft, and just before the draft, came forward with an idea that they would be asked the federal government for $150 million for funding, which has caused a little bit of a ruckus. Because, and we'll get into that, this idea of sports franchises getting money sometimes does not sit well with the public. But we're going to talk about why there is a case for what the CFL has done, the value of it over its history. Of course, the horse back in the early times of the CFL, the famous horse walked into the hotel in Toronto. There's been so many other memories. 13 men on the field for Saskatchewan as they were about to win a Grey Cup in McMahon Stadium. Some of the great games over the years. Battles between the Stampeders and the Eskimos, Lions and Stampeders. Wally Buono moving from the Stampeders to the BC Lions. There's so many memories. Doug Flutie, Jeff Garcia, and Bo Levi Mitchell, on and on and on. And the CFL does have a place in Canada's fabric, but does it deserve money? And also, is it making the mark that it has the potential to really make? So we're going to dig into what the CFL does and how this is going to go. And really, I guess one of the other questions we're going to have to ask is what is going to happen with this season. And we have two guests with us today. We have Michael Beck. Michael is a fellow BCIT alum, contributor to the BT Steel Curtain, the director of marketing for the Langley Rams, and at Country 107.1. How's it going, Michael?
Oh, it's going pretty good, Kev. Pleasure to be on.
Thanks. And we also got Jack with us. Jack from the Oilers YYC podcast, the Esks YYC podcast as well, at Big Mantry on Twitter. How's it going?
It's going good tonight, Kev.
Good. I'm sure you're all starving with the sports. At least we've had a couple of drafts, NFL and CFL draft, but I'm sure the starving of the sports has not been necessarily great for everyone. Or how have you dealt with that?
I guess for me, I'm tearing my hair out or running up my Visa card. I don't know. I'm just online shopping like crazy. I don't know. It's been hard, to be honest. It's an experience I don't think I was ever prepared for, and really don't want to have to go through again.
Agreed. Jack?
I've been lucky in the sense that I moved to Revelstoke permanently back at the end of November. So riding this out into a mountain town is much different than if I was still living back in Calgary. We've got a little more opportunity to get out of the house here. My fiance is a nurse is the main nurse at the clinic here in town, so she's still been working like crazy. And unfortunately, I'm in maintenance for properties, so I too have been working because you know what? Stuff doesn't stop breaking down when everyone stays home.
No,
it seems to break down more.
It's true. Yes, it's true.
But never in my life did I think I'd have to wear a mask and gloves going into people's units that weren't, I've done that in the past because you've gone in with mold situations or stuff, but I've never had just normal people where you're like, hey, I'm healthy, I have a mask, I have gloves, can I come in? It's definitely not things I ever thought I'd have to do in my lifetime.
It's true, yes. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, this is quite something. The words unprecedented time have been overstated sometimes, but it really feels like this is just new territory. You're right, Michael, I agree. I hope we don't have to go through this again. And it has, of course, impacted the CFL. Of course, they have, obviously, for obvious reasons, have delayed training camp. We don't know if the season's going to start, when the season's going to start. But let's start, maybe I'll start with Jack here on this one first. Why is the CFL important to you?
I guess it all comes down to the same thing when it comes to any sport. When it's your home team, when it's your home league, you tend to be drawn to it at a younger age, at least in my generation. I'm 42 years old. I grew up going to the Eskimos. I grew up in Edmonton, so I grew up going to watch the Eskimos play with my dad. My best friend growing up's dad was the beat reporter for the Eskimos for the Edmonton Journal. It was kind of woven in, and that was, I was just old enough to remember the glory days, the Warren Moon, the 5 Grey Cups, and it's something that's always kind of ingrained itself. And as I got older, I shifted away from just being an Eskimos fan, which I am, like through and through. I run a podcast, Esks YYC for a reason, but I'm a CFL fan. And as I got older, and I've been to Grey Cups, and I've interacted with the people from other teams, other fans of all generations, you start to realize that it's a little different being a CFL fan than being, say, an NHL fan. There's a camaraderie that's there because it's our league. It's the CFL. It's the Canadian Football League, and you kind of get sucked into that if you let yourself. If you there's a lot of people who I've talked to like, I just don't get it. I'm like, well, have you ever been to a Grey Cup? Have you ever been to a playoff game for that matter? You'll see what that is, and you start to feel that sense of community that I think there's one of the few things that over the years the CFL has done very good at is that sense of community once you get to that point. And for me, it's woven into that part of Canadiana for me. It's no different talking about the CFL as to talk about the Tragically Hip or Gordon Lightfoot or Mike Myers or anything in that in that realm of a cultural what makes Canada Canada. To me, the CFL is it's one of those things that holds that together for me. So it's always been a very personable thing. It's always very, very approachable thing. We used to go to Boston Pizza downtown Edmonton after all the Eskimos games, and by the third time the guys were coming in after the games, we were sitting at the table with Jason Moss and Ricky Ray and Sean Fleming having drinks and eating supper with them because we were just people that became friends with them. So it's so approachable as a fan that it becomes, like I said, it's like a sense of community it builds. And to me, I think that's one of the things that makes Canada great is we have that sense of community when stuff like what's going on in the world right now happens. We tend to see in Canada that communities pick themselves up and they deal with it together. And it's part of being Canadian. And I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that in the CFL. Maybe not so much day to day because it's hard to do that day to day on a one game a week thing. But they're so involved with their communities. They're so involved with the charities. They're so involved with the places that they live while they're playing that you get that warm fuzzy feeling of what they're trying to do. So that's kind of that's how I see the CFL. That's where my passion for the league comes from.
Michael, what about you?
I look at it in a few different lenses, probably in different kind of stages of my life, because where I'm kind of at now with the CFL is someone who, myself playing at a fairly high level in Canada before. Now I really get the opportunity to watch a lot of my friends play. There's guys littered throughout the league that I've either grown up with or played against, and it's pretty exciting just being able to sit back and watch those guys perform at an extremely high level. I think as I kind of move more towards my childhood, there's some of those moments that kind of just stick out in my memory as kind of some of my earliest sports moments. I believe the first professional sporting event I ever went to was a CFL game. Even further than that, like just kind of remembering some Lions Grey Cups or just games here and there. It's kind of just my first real taste of professional sports, and especially something so local and something that I can consume on such a everyday almost basis. And you see the guys in the community, they come out to practice and they teach you what it's like really to grow up and become a member of our society. I think as one of the great teachers of football is they really kind of teaches you what it means to be an integral part of society, really. And, I think the CFL is something that has really been kind of attached to me, and something I'll probably continue to be a part of for the rest of my life. I certainly hope, at least.
I don't. One of the things I don't know if people realize as much, and maybe Michael, you can speak to this more, is how the CFL has helped Canadian football develop. Like, I know that. And it's probably a separate topic, or maybe it is part of this topic, and more than I realize is youth sports isn't necessarily well attended, but we've certainly seen the development of Canadian football in the CFL with some of the players that you've played, and even now we're seeing some good Canadian content like a Chase Claypool being drafted for the Pittsburgh Steelers and others as well. But it is developing another identity in Canada other than hockey.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think it's really kind of put in place the ability for kids to kind of see themselves, especially as more and more kids, like it is sad to say, but I think more kids are kind of drawn to the NFL, more the glitz, more the giant attendance, but like seeing our players succeed, develop, like the Brett Joneses, or whoever coming from the CFL into the NFL, or whomever, I think watching them and then going out to a practice, say you play for Abbotsford Minor and you are Chase Claypool, and then one day after practice, a few of the BC Lions show up like they always did for every single minor program through my experience, even at the high school level. They'd come out, they'd teach you the fundamentals, and really, how many sports do those players will actually come out and be a part of those practices? I know I have tons of friends that have never met a professional hockey player, let alone them come out to practice. So I think it's kind of those experiences and kind of those teaching moments and people you can look up to. I know a few times people just seeing Giroy Simon in the community, or he is a part of a training organization locally here that can really help kids get scholarships to move on to the next level of football. I think those guys are really one of the bigger stepping stones for kids developing their football futures, be it wherever they may end up. But I think the players, especially in the CFL, compared to any other sports league that I've had any interest or paid attention to, I think they just do a great job of attaching themselves to our little communities.
Jack, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. Like I said, I grew up in Edmonton, and Gizmo Williams would come to school. I didn't play football growing up, but I had friends that did, who played, high school football. There was a couple of the guys that I went to high school with ended up playing for U of A. Those guys were always out and about. One of my best friends went to high school at Concordia High School in Edmonton, and at that time didn't have its own gym. So they actually used Commonwealth's gymnasium. So we were down there every Saturday playing basketball in the summer, or when summer hit during the week. And we used to play 3-on-3 regularly with Gizmo Williams, Leroy Blue, and Willie Pless. And to this day, you run into those guys somewhere, they know who you are. And I think in the CFL, that player interaction with the community it's astounding as how well they do it, because they almost know to just go do it. You brought up the example of friends who've never met a professional hockey player. They're trained now, especially as they grow up, to follow the script, don't say anything bad, go to practice, go home, go to games, go home. The only time you ever see them out and about with a hockey team is because they won a contest, where they're part of this very specific program where a player is going to come play at one of your practices or come sign a few autographs. Whereas the CFL, you see that regularly. I know in Edmonton, they would show up at high schools randomly to see the practices and see what these guys were doing. One of my old teachers was Peter Lavorado, who played for 4 years and won 4 Grey Cups with Edmonton. And he was the assistant coach of the football team. And you better believe there was players that used to come out to ours because he was there. He'd like, hey, why don't you come out and show my boys how to do it for real? And, you'd go watch practice and there'd be 6 Eskimos out there. You don't see that engagement in the other professional sports, at least not, especially not in Canada. Maybe the NFL does it a bit better. I know people who work within the NFL, and they say to an extent, but it's not the players that you would ever recognize that go do that kind of stuff. It's the guy that was drafted 6th round 2 years ago who barely made the roster that does those appearances, not your starting quarterback or your number one linebacker or your top offensive, your top offensive lineman. So I think that engagement in the CFL, they do a good job of instilling it in the players that go be part of the community while you're here. And the players seem to really embrace it.
Yeah, it's. I remember meeting a number of players at different events. I met Mark McLaughlin, a few former Stampeder kicker. A couple of other guys just came up and said, "Hi, I'm this." I can't remember their names right now for some particular reason, but Henry Burris was well known to being very friendly in the Calgary community and in the Ottawa community. Michael mentioned G. Roy Simon. I remember seeing Wally Bono a number of years ago run down the seawall and I said, "Hi, Wally," and he went, "Hi, how are you?" And it feels like the football community, like there's no, and I think that this is maybe part of the marketing issue too. There's no diva in the CFL necessarily, and I think it's great that they do the groundswell report, but is part of the problem with the CFL is that they don't have that face, that particular, those, like in the NHL you got a Connor McDavid, in the NBA you got a LeBron James, you have some recognizable names. In the CFL it's hard to find a recognizable name. Is that a challenge for the CFL, or is this like, this is part of the community and it is a team, football is the ultimate team sport and we're okay with that?
You know what I honestly think, for me, it boils down, especially in football, to quarterbacks. I think right now, especially kind of like the last 10-ish years, we aren't seeing kind of that franchise quarterback for, like, as long as I can remember before, like, this kind of era, every team had someone who was like a legit all-star, and you can go coast to coast. Anthony Calvillo, Henry Burris, literally, like, Casey Printers, like, you name it, every single team had that guy. I think what's kind of happening is the backup quarterback in the NFL is starting to make gross amounts of money, and there's, like, they don't even care about seeing the field because the paycheck is just absurd. Like, I think in years past you'd see like an Eason or Fromm, who was taken later in the NFL draft, actually come to Canada, get reps, make like same amount of money as they would if they were a backup before possibly leaving to go back down, or staying and having a successful long career. Those kind of faces of franchises, I think, kind of made the CFL a little larger, because there were some big names, some guys that you'd watch competing for an NCAA college championship. And there hasn't necessarily been too many of the gigantic, bigger than life personalities, I'd say, in the history of the league. It has been Canadian to its roots, even if it were to be to a fault, where we're very humble, very, I don't know, I think humble is probably the best way to put it as a people. But I think it really boils down to that quarterback play and just kind of the recycling of names, and the kind of era we're in right now, where it's only like maybe 3 guys, or I'd consider a franchise. It's kind of, I think that's kind of what we're missing out on right now.
I think you're fairly bang on with that, but I think there's a different way they could go with that as a marketing strategy to try to help create that. And Kevin, you brought it up great. Most leagues, they have 2 or 3 stars within the league that they really, really hitch their wagon to when it comes to marketing. The NHL is a prime example. You've got Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin. It doesn't matter what team you're a fan of, you know who those 3 players are. And of course, there are other players that could probably fall into that category. I'm just using those 3 because they're kind of the big ones. I think the CFL being a 9-team league, potentially 10, depending what happens to the Schooners, I think the CFL needs to kind of follow that kind of model, whereas, like you're saying, Michael, is a great example of not every team has that star power. and they don't right now. I mean, you've got how many teams that are running two quarterbacks and one's hot for 6 weeks and then the other one's hot for 6 weeks, or is getting traded and gets hot for the other team. But I think the CFL needs to figure out a marketing strategy where maybe they pick 3 or 4 or 5 players. Doesn't matter what teams they are. Market them. Make their names be known. Bo Levi Mitchell, Mike Riley, Adam Bighill out of Winnipeg. I mean, that guy's larger than life. Yeah. Don't necessarily go off the positions, but find those personalities that you can throw up in an interview, or you can throw up in a marketing campaign that can hold their own, and try to drive some interest that, this guy, this Adam Bighill, man, that guy was so funny when I saw him on this interview. And then you watch the guy play and he rips people's legs off for fun. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a football player. Like, that might be part of the marketing strategy, is not worry about, and I think the CFL's done a poor job in the last 10 years. And again, it could be the lack of star power, like you're saying, Michael, is they're trying to say that everyone's equal. It's a team thing. You know, we win as a team, we lose as a team. That's fine. But give the people somebody to cheer for, whether it's, a good guy or a bad guy. Like, get the names out there of your bigger players and let them try to grow a bit of interest, and see where that goes. And I don't know, I'm not a marketer by any stretch, but I've talked to a number of my friends who are CFL fans, and they kind of have that same thing. It's like, who cares if Mike Riley turns out to be the face of the CFL, or Bo Levi Mitchell? Like, get somebody out there. Like, show people that there are players in this league that are outstanding players that play the game, not just, they weren't good enough to make the NFL, so they're here. It's like, no, Riley's one of the better quarterbacks in North America. Is he a top 5 in the NFL? No. But there's teams in the NFL I'm pretty sure Bo Levi or Mike Riley could start for right now, because the talent pool of NFL quarterbacks is so poor right now that I think people forget that they're playing football at a very high level and they're doing it very successfully. So why not promote that?
And yet you have the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and who, for somehow in the midst of all of, like, I mean, I wouldn't say the CFL's in a downtime, but I do agree with Michael. We don't have those players that electrify people's memories. I mean, Bo Levi Mitchell is great, but he doesn't. I don't know if he necessarily moves the needle like a Doug Flutie or a Gizmo Williams does. I'm sounding old. Back in the day. I mean, he's great, but yet the Saskatchewan Roughriders have somehow built this brand that has, like, I don't know. They're even larger than life now. What are they doing? Is it just that's the only game in town, or are they doing something different than other teams?
I can speak to Saskatchewan quite well. My dad's born and raised in Saskatchewan, a little town in the middle of nowhere. My fiance spent the last 21 years in Saskatchewan, mainly because her dad got stuck there. So that's where they got stuck for 20 years. Saskatchewan has built the brand that they have literally because there is no other competition in Saskatchewan. There is nothing else. And they've been able to ride that for decades. The only other thing in Saskatchewan that they have is junior hockey. There is nothing else. But while we talk about a Saskatchewan brand that's been building, the last 3 or 4 years, especially since they built that new stadium, they're losing fans. They're losing the people that are driving from Saskatoon. They're losing the people that are used to drive from PA or Lloydminster or Weyburn or wherever else. They're losing their fan base at the stadium because they figured they could build a new stadium, charge whatever they wanted for tickets, and people would still keep coming. And they're learning very quickly that that's not working. I know of many I'm talking decade-long season ticket holders that have canceled their tickets. And the game I was at in Saskatchewan last year was not a sellout. And that was on a beautiful Friday night in Regina. And it was not a sellout. And apparently that's happening a lot more since they built that new stadium than it's ever happened in the past. So while the brand has done incredibly well for the years it has, that's going to start to tail off in Saskatchewan, because while they might be the only thing in town or in the province, you can watch every one of those games on TSN. So if it's costing you an extra $300 a year or $400 a year to go to a game that you're already spending $200 a time to go to because you're driving, why would you go anymore? The in-stadium experience there is pretty blah. I mean, most of the CFLs are pretty blah, but Saskatchewan's used to be quite good, and now it's like, meh, it's just kind of there. So it will be interesting to see what happens to Saskatchewan in the next 5 or 6 years, because I think they're going to have to figure out how to rebrand themselves and not just be, oh, we're the Rough Riders and we're the only thing here. They're going to have to do something to convince people to come back. And I think that ties into something Michael had said just before we started recording, is trying to get younger generations interested as the older generations age out of going to the games. But Saskatchewan is an anomaly because there is nothing else in that province. Nothing. So when you got something that you can, put your pride in and do, you get it. And then the other thing that's happened is there's so many people that have moved out of Saskatchewan historically for decades because there was nothing in Saskatchewan for work. That just spread itself all the way across the country. No different than you see when you go to a hockey game in whatever city in North America, and if Toronto's playing in that city or Montreal, for some reason half of that bloody bloody arena is full of Maple Leafs or Habs jerseys. It's the same thing. So it's while they did a really good job building a brand and like, this is ours, let's hang on to this, those bonds are weakening there.
You mentioned the stadium, and that's something I kind of want to quickly touch on. I think for most of the CFL, there's some gigantic facilities. I think that's kind of an issue, like filling those humongous buildings. I can especially speak for BC. When you go to the game, they have the entire upper bowl tarped off, and it's honestly not a very well tarping. You can clearly see all the empty seats. And then the lower bowl is still pretty sparse itself. And when you're watching on TV again, like you said, those ticket prices are pretty insane, even though they're not selling these games out. I think when I look back at when BC Place was going under renovations, and they had they had the Empire Stadium, the temporary seating there as a sellout, and you know what? That environment was amazing. I would go to any game that I possibly could when it was there. There's something to be said about sellouts, and I think there's also something to be said about where they actually build the buildings. I don't think BC Place is a particularly good location for football, especially in BC. When you look at our province, it's more of like the best teams, community and high school wise, are more so in the valley. The people that care about it are further away, and they don't really want to commute an hour all the way down there to watch a game that costs way too much, that the environment's kind of meh, and they can watch it on TV for absolutely nothing. So, I completely agree with that point. I think one of the bigger issues is ticket pricing, kind of where these stadiums are, and the experience of having a sparse stadium just sours people.
Oh, and it does. And it I grew up in Edmonton with Commonwealth Stadium. That's a huge facility. And when you're in there in a sellout, it's amazing. But when you're in there and it's Hamilton on a Thursday night game, and it's trying to rain all day, and it's still, even if it's sunny, and there's only 20,000 people in that stadium, it's awfully quiet because it's just such a mass. And, I think Montreal's template where they built that smaller stadium, I think Toronto moving out of the Skydome is magic for them. I really, really hope it's magic for them. But, Winnipeg and Saskatchewan and Regina building those new, quite large stadiums, I don't know if that was the way to go. I mean, Mosaic holds 30. I just looked it up because I couldn't remember. It holds 33,000, and it's expandable for 40,000 if they host Grey Cups. 33,000 people coming to a stadium in Regina when the population of Regina itself is only like 285,000. That's a little excessive. Like, you are 100% relying on at least a third of your fans coming from out of town at that point. And you're running a risk eventually that those fans are going to dry up because, why don't I watch it at home? I mean, the NFL is fighting the exact same thing. This is not a CFL specific problem. There are buildings in the NFL that have been selling out for decades that are not selling out now because people are happy to sit at home and watch the game on their 60-inch TV or 80-inch TV these days and not have to pay $13 for a beer. So that's a huge conversation, but it's like coming back to just the Saskatchewan conversation. I don't know if I think the mystique of Saskatchewan is gonna run out, and they're gonna have to figure out really quickly how to fix that.
Dollar beers.
Yeah, dollar beers would do it. I don't even.
Go ahead. Hello?
Hi. I didn't have anything, Kevin.
Oh, I thought Jack was going to say something.
Sorry, guys, I cut off there for a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, but even, I remember. I know I went to an Empire Stadium game when BC Place was renovated, and it was really, it's in a beautiful place. I mean, not the greatest part of Vancouver necessarily, but it was a great seating, kind of a little very old school, but it looked like you're not sitting there looking at drab seats. Where when I'm at BC Place, it's hard to really enjoy the game because it feels like so dark and dingy. But Empire Stadium really worked really well for football, and I mean this conversation has been starting to happen a little bit more, Michael, in Vancouver about the idea that maybe you give the Whitecaps BC Place and the Lions move east or out of downtown Vancouver somewhere else. Do you think that that's a viable idea for the Lions?
I would absolutely welcome that idea with open arms. The only problem is finding exactly where that would be. I love McLeod Athletic Park, but that's maximum right now. It's only 4,000 seats. So I think the sweet spot for numbers right now, you look at kind of like a Tim Hortons Field, also a brand new facility out in Hamilton. That's, I believe, just a shade over 23,000 people. I think if you're sitting around that number and you get it somewhere, probably Langley, Surrey is probably a smart way to go about it, closer to where the Lions practice facility is, especially if they do get that SkyTrain in Langley and they already do have it running through Surrey. I think that could be the magic place for it. Football is thriving in those communities. I remember for myself personally, even going back about 15, 20-ish years now, as a kid, anytime we went into Vancouver and played any of the teams located within that city, we absolutely crushed them. It was always like a 70-0 drubbing. I think that has something to do with those communities just really not caring about the sport. It's more soccer, it's more hockey, it's more basketball within kind of the city. The more kind of you move east, it's kind of where it's hot right now. I don't really know why that necessarily is, but that's kind of where I think the majority of big-time CFL fans in this province is. And I think moving forward, if there was ever a possibility to kind of move the Lions out of BC Place, I think it would be a really wise move. The only issue is finding where that place would be.
Jack, did you have any thoughts on that? I know you don't.
I've been to BC Place. I've got my godparents live across the False Creek from Granville Island. The only time I've ever been in BC Place personally was I had done the marathon in Vancouver, and that's where it starts and finishes. And I remember being in it after the finish and thinking, wow, it's a beautiful building. It really is, but it's huge. The TV doesn't do it justice to how big a space that is. So I can only imagine, when you're watching it on TV and you see the few fans that are in there, the atmosphere must get sucked out of the game some night, especially if BC, you have a bad quarter or something and the fans really go out of it. I mean, it must just be kind of the atmosphere must be completely dead. And the only thing I can possibly relate that to is going to see the Montreal Expos play in the Big O towards the end of their stint in Montreal. And I think, if I remember right, the announced attendance for that game was 8,000 in a 60,000 seat stadium with the roof closed. It was, you could hear what the players were saying in the outfield from the first baseline. That's how quiet it was. So I think the big buildings, they don't work unless you've got them full. And the idea of moving the Lions out of downtown Vancouver, which to me isn't your hotbed of football fans, probably not even your hotbed of sports fans, let alone football, to a place where they'd be more popular, I think would be a great idea. I think every team that's in Canada that can do that successfully should. And I think we've seen it already with Toronto making that move and how Montreal's set up. It's, 20, 24,000 seat stadiums in a place where people can easily access it, whether it's through public transportation or not. I think that's, in the long run, that's just a win.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll get to Calgary in a moment, too, because I do think that this is a big part of the conversation. But, Michael, you touched on this. Michael touched on this off air, too, and it's this, the younger generation of fan hasn't necessarily, that the CFL hasn't connected with that younger generation of fan. What is it that is missing? Is it what the NFL is doing, or did the CFL lose it? Can they regain that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, especially kind of being someone who's kind of around the system a lot of things that I think we're missing is kind of like going back a little bit to like the glitz of the game, and kind of the disconnect of how grand the experience of watching the NFL is on TV, and how it's, even if it's not, it looks like a sellout every single game, because at least the hard camera side is always completely packed, and the huge personalities with the millions of followers on social media and like that entire growing list. I think a pretty good example of the disconnect between the CFL and the NFL is when it even comes to the draft. I know this year isn't a good example, but moving back to even last year, you can watch the entire NFL draft and it's entertaining for what is a pretty boring kind of event. Really, it's hours on hours of just names being called, and you might not necessarily even watch that player play even a single snap.
Especially the NFL draft. Sorry to interrupt, but the NFL draft, like after the first 4 hours, it's like, how does this go for 2 more days?
Exactly. And then on the flip side, though, you watch the CFL draft, you might get maybe the first 9 picks of the first round, maybe not even get that, which I think is just a complete shame. And you don't even get the players in studio. They're not shaking anyone's hand. You don't really get to see them. You don't really get to, you hardly get any experience of watching them on TV, which is another point I'll get into. But you don't know these kids even remotely, and then they don't even get the experience of walking across the stage. Now, transitioning back a little bit as well, I think a big issue is not airing any U Sports or Simon Fraser games on TV at all. I think that's a huge mistake, especially because we have 5 channels at TSN. I think 7 of Sportsnet, depending where you're located, and CBC, and how many Canadian-oriented channels we have that might be playing the same sporting event on all 5 of their stations. They could be playing a darts repeat. It's like, come on, we have sports in Canada that we're not promoting, we're not putting on TV. We could help give these programs more funding by people just watching, and some sponsorships, and maybe you watch a game on TV and now you're more inclined to actually show up to a game. I think one of our biggest issues is just poorly actually getting people out to these situations.
I agree. It's not, I know we're talking football here, but I do agree, especially you look at junior hockey. To me, that what happened with the WHL and the Vancouver Giants not being able to see their own Western Hockey League final here in Vancouver. It's the way that amateur sports is promoted and marketed, and how hard it is to find that content here. I think it's really frustrating, and I think that is probably one of the reasons why, in my mind, the CFL is lost. It's not even the CFL's fault. I would argue it's the TV channel's fault. I feel like I'm saying fart. It's the TV channel's fault, not really promoting some of these young kids. And it's not like they need to be divas, but it's like, why aren't we knowing who these CFL draft picks are before the draft? It just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I'm offside, but
I agree with both of you. I mean, I think college ball should be more, and whether it's hockey, I don't know. I've been to more University of Alberta Golden Bears hockey games in my life than I have all other sporting events combined. Because it's great hockey. It's all guys that came out of the dub. Like, it's good hockey. There's nothing wrong with the University of Canadian U Sport hockey. Is actually really high-end hockey because they're all the guys that came out of the CHL. I mean, these are the guys that either did get drafted, still want to go to university, or didn't get drafted, but might have won a Memorial Cup 2 years in a row and are playing for the Huskies or playing for the Golden Bears or playing for the Dinos or whoever. And the football, it's the guys coming up. Yeah, it's not the NCAA. It's not. I would argue that the NCAA, do this the way the NCAA is structured, you're never going to get that in Canada. Or I wouldn't want that in Canada. But you still get pretty darn good football. And I think there's a lot of people out there, on a Saturday afternoon, are going to flip that game on. They're going to be like, oh, hey, I went to university at Simon Fraser. Oh, and they're playing Western. Oh, yeah, I remember these were good. I'm going to watch this. Or I graduated from U of A, or my buddy graduated from U of A, or at my age now, my buddy's son plays for U of A. You know, Chris Cordy's son, who's working his way up the ranks now in the CFL, he was my math teacher. Mr. Cordy was my math teacher. Like, I've got a tie to that stuff. If you give people the ability to have an emotional connection to something, they're going to watch it. Whether it's college football, whether it's women's hockey, whether it's junior hockey, whether it's the NHL, like, you give people a human connection to it, they're going to watch it and it's going to be successful. But if you keep downplaying that it's, we don't put that on because it's just Canadian football or it's just university football, that's the attitude everybody's going to take to it. And that says that's a disservice to the entire ecosystem of junior sports.
Yeah. I mean, even junior football here is, I mean, that's hard to find a broadcast of that. And I'm sure Michael could speak to that as well. You know, with the Langley Rams, it's hard to get that kind of promotion too.
With it, they actually air, there's like its own kind of network, especially the British Columbia Conference. They air every single game online. But the thing is, they make you pay $20 to watch every single game. It's kind of ridiculous, especially if you're trying to bring in new fans. The only people who are going to pay that are the out-of-town parents because they want to watch their kids play. So I think the idea is there, but maybe they need to just get the sponsors to buck up a little bit more, because there's no way that just a casual sports fan just going to scroll through Facebook and see that there's this live stream of a football game, click on it and see, we're going to pay $20. I'm going to go to YouTube or watch something else.
And is there this myth in radio sports content that only the fans really want to hear about hockey in Canada? Like, do you think that is a myth that a lot of radio people believe, or is that true?
Speaking on the West Coast, I think as someone who's interned at either station and has experience on both sides, I think it's absolutely true that there's definitely some sort of hockey bias. And I know the Sportsnet side doesn't necessarily talk CFL at all unless they possibly have a guest in or the Grey Cup week is on. And on the TSN side, because they have the rights, they'll air the games in a pregame and postgame show. But other than that, that's kind of about it. The hockey taking precedence is by far, like, even the most minor league move, that's what's going to get talked about. And it's not even like the Giants, it's not any WHL, it's not college, it's just the NHL. That's what you're going to hear in Vancouver, and that's really it. And if you're lucky, there might be one page, about page 12 on the sports section, talking about the CFL, if that's ever going to even be an option.
Both cities I've lived in, Edmonton and Calgary, it's exactly the same, Michael. You're speaking. I know people that work for TSN 1260. I know people that work for CBC in Calgary. I've talked to a few of the people like Steinbrecher from the Fan 960, and they'll tell you the exact same thing. It's hockey. I've seen the text machine conversations of people when they talk about a different sport. The morning guys and TSN 1260 will be talking about something that happened in basketball or something that's really wild happening in golf, or like when Tiger won his last tournament there. And they talked about it for, I swear to God, it was 8 minutes. And Dusty's like, I was getting threats. Like, how dare you talk about golf when there was an Oilers game last night? And it as much as people want to blame it's the radio stations that always talk about hockey, it's because as soon as they don't talk about hockey, they get berated. They get lit up on social media. They get lit up on text machine. They get emails. They get old angry guys shaking their fist at the sky because why would you talk about curling? And I don't know on radio how you fix that, because, boy, that seems to be everywhere in Canada that I've had any experience in.
Honestly, I think it might even come to the point where you just read those messages out and you might even have to shame people. Just be like, I didn't realize that the only game in town is the Canucks and they haven't played in 3 nights. Like, that really doesn't seem fair to me, even remotely, that that's kind of the mindset of fans. And like, to your point, we also saw that often out here at 650 or 1040. It is a real thing, and if you haven't experienced it, it's really quite shocking, especially during, I'd say, the Raptors run. The Canucks were far out, like, didn't make the playoffs, weren't even close last year. And how dare the morning show talk about the Raptors winning the championship because they're from Toronto? Like, what?
Yep. Calgary and Edmonton saw the same thing. It was, like, how dare you talk about basketball? It's like, well, the Canadian team is destroying every team that's come up against it. Why wouldn't we talk about this? Like, this is a pretty big deal. But people are like, no, I want to hear why my team lost last night. You're like, oh, okay. I don't understand. Like, are you that desperate to hear why your team sucks? Like, it's kind of like one of those mental things where it's like, what's wrong with us if that's what's important, instead of talking about the success of something else, even if it's not maybe our number one thing. I mean, I was a big basketball guy growing up, and then I haven't paid attention to basketball for years. The last 2 years of the Raptors sure got me interested in basketball again. Yeah. Am I going to watch it every night? No, but I will sure run and watch playoff runs again. That was a ton of fun.
Yep. No, it got everybody into it. It's great. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that happens, because I do think the Canadian sports fan is well-minded. I mean, we haven't even got into soccer, right, and how popular that is. But Jack, because you lived in Calgary for so long, and I know listening to your podcast on Oilers YYC, you did talk about the Flames Arena deal. But from your perspective, McMahon Stadium, and we'll get into the differences here in a moment, but McMahon Stadium was supposed to be part of this next thing. What for the Stampeders football stadium, what needs to be done there? Because I don't know how much
burnt to the ground.
Yeah. Well, that too. Yes, that is probably like I have a park near my house here, and I think it might be better suited for a football game than McMahon Stadium. And there's no seats at this park, so that's how bad I think McMahon is. But it's the problem in Calgary right now is putting any building up seems to be met with some resistance.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that McMahon's going to get replaced anytime in any foreseeable future, to be honest with you, in Calgary. The Flames deal really doesn't look good. And with everything that's just gone down, and I mean, this isn't something we could predict, that we'd all be stuck at home and the global economy is going to crash. I mean, nobody could foresee that. However, that being said, there's no reason in Calgary that if the Flames wanted a new building, that the Flames could not have done more to do it. And I think the mistake was made by giving them what they did to get that new building. That being said, the chances of there being public money for McMahon Stadium, especially now, is non-existent. In my mind, I think the only way that building gets either one hell of a renovation or is replaced is if somehow the university can partner with the Stampeders and all levels of government to come up with the money, and do it more as kind of similar to what Winnipeg did, but maybe in a way that the city doesn't end up paying for the whole thing in the end, because that's a mess how that all went down. But I don't see McMahon getting any love. There's a very good large contingent of Stampeder fans in Calgary. They have what appears to be very loyal and a very large fan base, but they don't have the backing of the business leaders like the NHL does. They don't have the backing of the millionaires. And I mean, the Stampeders are pretty much, they're owned by the Flames. And the Flames don't care. If the Flames could unload them tomorrow, they would. They're not part of the plan now. Now that the Flames have that new building, the Stampeders are no longer part of their plans. They're not going to care less. I think part of the reason of them having the Stampeders was they were going to leverage that with the Flames and the Roughnecks to a lesser extent to build that big Calgary Next thing on the west end of town. And when that fell through, which I think some reason they were shocked fell through, I think that was kind of a nail in the coffin for how the Stampeders are going to be managed, not necessarily on the field or game to game, but managed as an entity by that organization.
Do you think how the Flames handled the arena situation has impacted people's opinion on what should happen with the CFL?
Yes, it has. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it in local papers there, basically saying, because the Stampeders own them, well, you've got millions of dollars, build your own. Well, we gave you money for the rink, which we shouldn't have done. So if you want this, tough, you're on your own. Make them pay for it. And I've seen that outlash in Calgary specifically when the CFL, it became public a month after they asked that they were looking to the federal for a bit of support. Is in Calgary, there was a lot of resentment. Like, no, you have millions of dollars. Your owners are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can pay for it. Why are we giving the CFL money? And unfortunately, it's a bit of a bad take. I mean, I understand in Calgary. I get it. There's a lot of anger there. But Calgary is a very specific example in the CFL. Edmonton and Saskatchewan, they're community-owned teams. The other owners for the other teams, they don't have lots of money. They're not, they don't have a board that has like 6 of the 10 richest men in Canada sitting on them. So, bad example. But yeah, Calgary's it's its own little world now with what's going on with the Stampeders and the Flames.
Michael, not specific to that, but I mean, maybe you followed that, maybe you haven't. But the kind of the idea about the millionaire owners owning these teams, are you seeing this as an impact of how people are treating the CFL?
I don't think necessarily in my local market that is much of a case, but like with obviously Lions ownership trying to sell the team for what feels like forever now. That definitely doesn't help anything. Like for the most part, all the news you actually hear is that Braley can't find like some sort of deal fell through. No one wants to buy it, or there's a deal in the works, and there has been one in the works for about 3 years. So the ownership in this community, I don't think really ties together too well, except you don't really hear too much about it. So I think that's the one thing it has going for them. I have heard a lot about the ongoing struggles between the city and the ownership of the Flames and how that's kind of impacted that entire situation, asking for so much money, of course. But I think kind of moving forward, I think we'll probably see more of the billionaire owners wanting their own facilities, especially down south. And especially as us Canadians kind of like looking at that, it's like, well, if they're doing that and able to make a profit on it, it doesn't really seem fair that you're taking our money and building facility that somehow you will profit from. I think they definitely want these mega millionaires, if they really want these facilities that they're going to make a pretty penny off of, they should probably be funding it themselves.
But let's maybe talk about the economic impact that the CFL has on communities, because I think this is often missed. I mean, when we talk about hockey, we'll hear often about all the great work. For example, there was a tweet that Mark Giordano gave someone $450 at a Walmart to pay for their groceries. All kinds of nice things that Daniel and Henrik Sedin have done, as an example. We've talked a little bit about the charity part that some have done in the community stuff. But what about the economic impact of no CFL? How is that going to hurt the community? Where would we see that visibly point out?
Well, I think from my experiences, you'd probably see a pretty big downturn when it comes to bars that are playing any sort of event. It's just another less thing on TV. Those kind of like downtown markets or food trucks that pull up to these stadiums, and any kind of entertainment that comes out and gets their name out there at halftime. Like, I did kind of not necessarily trash, but kind of point out that BC hasn't really gone too far in those kind of realms, but they do make an effort, even if it's minimal, to get some of these entertainment or food things out to their games or out in the community. I think without games, there's less ad revenue, so some of these shops aren't actually able to get their brand out on TV. There's less people actually consuming, less sports parties. All in all, I think it just adds to a big mess that will be kind of lost revenue in a lot of our outlets here locally.
I would echo the same statements. I mean, what else is there that's going on in summer in Canada? Yeah, we're definitely a population that loves to get outside in the summer. I mean, that's the whole Canadian ethos, is we hide in our houses in the winter because it's cold, and then summer comes and we're outside. But there's no other events. I mean, there's lots of festivals and stuff. I'm not taking away from stuff like that, but 9 games a year in every CFL city, there's a game. And I don't know how many games you guys have been in other cities, but you see the economic impact, especially in a place. I'll use Saskatchewan as a prime example, because I was there last year and it's kind of still fresh in my mind. There's a line of bars downtown. I don't remember the name of the street anymore, but you've got Rebellion Brewing, you've got the old Bushwhackers Brewing, you've got all these bars and stuff. And it seems like the entire city of Regina shows up on this street, and then they all jump on buses and they go to the stadium, and then they go to a football game, and then they get off, and then they disperse to different places to continue drinking. I can guarantee you talk to all those bars in a place like Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, even Hamilton, Ottawa. I mean, where Ottawa Stadium is perfect for this kind of stuff. The economic impact of those locations not having those games is, and you're going to see it this year, is big. It's an event for a lot of these cities. Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal to a lesser degree, too many people. It's not the same economic impact in a place like Vancouver. There would definitely be an economic impact to the normal hangouts pre-post game, or for the local fan that goes and watches it locally. But for a Saskatchewan, like a Regina, a Winnipeg, they would absolutely feel that. And it would change a lot of the areas in the cities that have built up because of these stadiums and because of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a couple of games in Montreal, and it is a really great atmosphere, and a couple of bars right nearby, and it's an easy walk right downtown. There is atmosphere there. I've never been to a game in Saskatchewan or Winnipeg myself, so I can't comment to that. But I can see that for sure. But I guess, one of the counter argument is these sports owners and sort of like all these people can pay. I think what's also missed is a lot of these players are not, they're not faces of any franchises or anything like that. We've already talked about that, but they're not making it sport money. They're not making millions of dollars. They're making maybe a little bit more than you and I money. And I'm not saying that that's an impoverished and like poor them, but there are a lot of CFL players that ended up having to be teachers, firefighters, cops, having to take second jobs just to make ends meet. It's, they are, for lack of a better word, they're actually us, just more athletic.
Yeah, you're not. There's the top 20% of the CFL players make good money. The minimum salary in the CFL is still only $65,000 a year. And there's a good percentage of the players on those football teams, and that's what they make, is $65,000 to $75,000 a year. Your star players, like your Bo Levi Mitchells, your Mike Rileys of the world, they'll make $250,000, $300,000 a year in Canadian dollars, which really affects when you think about star power and how much they're getting paid versus the other leagues that all pay in American dollars. There's a lot of those players that hold second jobs, and that's why a lot of them go back to the U.S. in the summer and go home, is because they probably make as much as they do playing here in the other 6 months that they're not playing, because they're getting paid in American dollars. And a lot of them, they've graduated university. They all have their college degrees, whether that's in arts, which could be, or, some of them come out with business degrees and teaching degrees and various other things. It's a lot different dichotomy, and it's the same as when you talk about the millionaires to pay for the stadiums. Edmonton is a community-owned football team. Saskatchewan is a community-owned football team. Until 2007, Winnipeg was a community-owned football team, and they're all pretty much designed to break even. They run as nonprofits. They don't make money, and money they do make, they store and they use it and they renovate. They buy stuff for the players and they make their organizations better. But they don't have $150 million socked away to build a new stadium. And I can guarantee you the Flames organization does not. The Stampeders aren't making enough money as that part of the business to pay for that either. So there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes in Canada when they look at the CFL and it's like, well, we're going to build a new building. Well, they could pay for it themselves. Pay for it with what? Their returned empties? Like, yeah. If you made all the fans drink canned beer, you might be able to do it that way.
Yeah. Donate your can.
Yep. Yeah, just bottle drives. That would work.
That'll work. Yeah. Mike, did you have anything to add on that, or?
I think hit the nail pretty good on the head there.
So going forward with the CFL, let's start here. We know training camp is not going to start. I'm going to throw this out to you. I threw this out to a couple people on it at 650. They kind of have poo-pooed this, but I still wonder if there is an option for this. We're seeing the NHL do the hub. Look at the hub city. Edmonton's in there. Vancouver is apparently considering it. Toronto is considering it. I don't know why I'm cringing thinking that, but whatever. Could the CFL do a concept of a hub city where they can play with empty fans, without fans, in a Saskatchewan or a Winnipeg?
I don't think there'd be any benefit to that for the CFL. There's not enough money. They won't make enough money doing that. They would probably lose money doing that. The CFL is so. When we talk about the NHL being gate-driven revenues, the CFL is massive. I mean, the TV deal for TSL only makes up something like 12% of each team's budget. So televising the games to empty stadiums, they're not going to make money doing that. They're going to lose money doing that.
Okay, that's fair. I just thought that would be an interesting concept the CFL could look at, but if they're going to lose money, that's not necessarily the brightest idea then.
No, I think that Oh, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to quickly say, couple with that, I don't know how many of the players making league minimum are definitely going to want to put themselves on a plane, be away from family, because that's probably what it boiled down to, just being completely isolated in whatever city, wherever it may be. I don't know if everyone's going to want to even show up to do that.
No, and that's a conversation with all the leagues, like even the NHL. People running around, they're just going to do it in like Edmonton or Vegas or whatever, and it's going to be great. If I was an NHL player, I'd be like, nope.
Yeah,
the NHLPA has been ridiculously quiet on this because I have a sneaky suspicion they've done a poll with their players, and their players are going, nope, you sent us all home, and now you expect us to travel from all ends of this world back to play in empty seasons, locked up in hotels away from our family for months on end. And it didn't help that, Campbell comes out and says, even if we had a few people test positive, that wouldn't shut things down. Well, obviously you don't give a shit about the players now. I mean, if I was a player, I'd be like, nope. And as an Edmonton Oilers fan, I do not want Connor McDavid playing and potentially being exposed to the virus. Now that more and more studies are coming out, the long-term damage that this thing is potentially doing to people's lungs, whether they get really sick or not, is irrelevant. If you're a high-level athlete making millions of dollars, are you willing to put yourself in that risk? I don't think that's going to fly. And someone who makes a league minimum who lives in Alabama is not going to be too willing to get on a plane to go spend 2 months or 3 months living in Regina. I mean, Regina's bad enough when you can go drink at the cool little pubs, but it's horrible if you're just stuck in a hotel there.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you, and I do see that point, and I know it's a separate conversation, but I know that I know Elliot Friedman has reported there are a few NHL players more than it's what's being public saying, you know what, I have other issues, I have other health issues. If we play, if you decide to play, I'm not sure I'm doing it. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's some pretty big names on that list that are like, I'm not doing it, sorry.
No, and my personal opinion is I think the NHL would do a much better service to itself being, what are we here, the beginning of May, is just getting out in front of a microphone and said, you know what? It's not going to be right whether we finish it or not now. Season's done. Because... I think it was Drew Doughty that came out and said, no, you win the Stanley Cup playing in some hokey tournament that because we don't have a full season. That's not winning a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys you've had a massive vacation and now you're going to go back and play. So all your injured players are back. No, that's not winning a Stanley Cup. That's winning a minor league hockey tournament, and I kind of agree. It's like, this isn't like at this point, if it had been 2 or 3 weeks, and they could have got going again, sure. Play a slightly condensed season, I'm cool with that. But at this point, like, how are you going to play any kind of real legitimate tournament and then be ready to start next season without potentially creating a whole bunch of injury problems because you're going to play a condensed season? To me, just looking at, I understand the NHL, there's a lot of money behind this, and I understand that the NHL's trying to make money, and I get that. I just don't think it's worth it in the long run, where you could potentially have a much bigger problem than it's worth. And, a league like the CFL, it's even worse because nobody makes enough money to put themselves in that kind of risk.
No. Yeah. So if you're the CFL, what do you do here? Do you consider a September start? Or...
I like the idea of a shortened season. I don't think it's worth risking following years. If it's possible, I would probably honestly probably even cut it down to just 9 games. Play half the season, you play every team once, and then play the playoffs as is. I think that's the way it could work. It could also be a way to try out a no conference theme, and you can actually bring in the best players. Or not best players, best teams they all make it after a round robin. I don't hate that idea, but I don't think the players necessarily want to play a full season if that means it drags out through the entire Canadian winter and you're playing in Regina or you're playing in Winnipeg in like -40, depending on wind chill, could be even worse. I don't think people are necessarily going to want to do that. And then if the seasons are pushed back a couple months, that means next year they're not really going to want to rush right back in for the beginning of June, end of May to get into training camps. So that's just going to kind of affect the schedule every single year. I think next year, for every sport, it just needs to end on time. I think that's the best way to go about things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as long as you can, I think if the CFL can at least play 9 games, play them. Don't condense it. Just play your 9 games. I've been a proponent for a long time of best teams get in for the playoffs, like none of this East-West conference with the crossover thing. Run with that and then be done with it. Reset for next year. Hopefully we're done with this by next year and move on. But I don't think they should be rushing to play games in empty stadiums because I just don't think it's going to work. I just don't think you're going to get the players. I don't think you're going to get, and TSN will show it, but I honestly wonder what it would be like to watch a CFL game with no fans in the stadium on TV. That would be weird. So I don't know if you're doing yourself a service or a disservice by doing that because you're taking away an element of the atmosphere even just watching the game on TV, and you're pissing off all your local fans because they can't come watch football.
Yeah, I think for football, I wonder this too. For playoffs, if we go through the NHL playoffs as an example, without fans, I think it is going to lose an element because it's just the fans are part of that. The Winnipeg with the white and the sea of red and Oiler blue and whatever else is going on out there. That fan base is part of the game. It is if you're telling a story, it is a character in the story. And in football, even in regular season, the fans are a character in the story. And I don't know how. I mean, it's going to be football, but the element of not having the fan there, I think, changes the game. Now, it could change the game in a good way or a bad way, depending on the player, I guess. But it does change what we're watching.
Yeah, it'll affect the ebb and flow of the hockey game. I mean, using NHL playoffs as an example, I mean, the home teams are always insane. Like, look at Vegas on their run. Holy man, like those fans were crazy. Watching that game without those fans completely changes what you're watching.
Yeah.
And are you going to be interested in a playoff series that doesn't involve your team if there's no storyline behind it? I don't know. I don't know how that works or not.
Mike, what do you think?
Sorry, I cut out there for a second. What was the question?
The idea of playing without fans.
Okay, right. It really depends, like you were saying, because how much it's gate affected. I think if they're going to lose money, I don't see a point in it. But I also see kind of the more human sports side, the escapism of sports. I would love to just flip something on and watch it right now. That would be amazing. Something to look forward to. I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. If it didn't affect the actual lifestyle and health of the players, I'm all for getting something on TV. If they can't afford it and it could kill the league and then you end up not getting it ever again, then I'm totally against it, obviously. But if a league can afford to do so, and sponsors are willing to do it, I'm totally game to get just any product on any network, just to get something for people to be excited for, just to get home, forget about work, forget about their daily stresses, and just get something on TV to watch.
How do you think the athletes would respond to empty arenas, though?
I've seen a few that said it'd be a different experience. Honestly, if they're getting paid millions of dollars, I don't think they'd care. Again, if it's a CFL, I hate to say it, but if you're playing for the Lions, you're probably kind of used to it. If you played in Canadian college, you played in front of no one before. It's probably wouldn't even affect you. Like it is kind of what it is in this market, especially Canadian football. And our players not really playing in front of anyone. It'd be more of a shock to show up to a stadium that is sold out. So I think when it comes to the major four, if they're getting their big tickets, I mean, it's more of a whatever sort of thing. I know I saw LeBron James say something along the lines of he didn't want to play if the fans weren't there, but he is on that like lifetime Nike $1 billion contract or whatever. And if they told him to play, I bet he probably would. But I guess it really kind of boils down to how much a player's making, because at the end of the day, I don't necessarily know if they care too much about that fan presence.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the CFL. So I guess in terms of the funding aspect here, I guess we haven't really talked specifically about it. We've talked all around it, but we haven't talked about it. Good job, host. What are our thoughts on what the CFL has asked the federal government to do? Is this a reasonable request? Is there room for negotiation? What are your thoughts?
I think personally, I think it was more of a deal of shoot so freaking high that whatever comes close, whatever their offer is probably exactly what we need. I don't know. I think $150 million seems like a little high, just kind of what it really means. Like if you don't have to rent facilities, if there's no season and you don't have to pay the players or pay them necessarily in full, I don't see how there's $150 million worth to spend. Like, if it just happened to be a year where all these rich people just end up breaking even, if they didn't already, or cut some sort of tiny loss, then you know what? Like, whatever, like, sorry, suck it up. Like, that's just what's going to happen. But I don't know. I think $150 million is kind of like just kind of almost ridiculous number, almost an attempt to get, say the Canadian government say, oh, how about we give you 10, and then they jump all over it because you know what, $1 million or $10 million could pay most of the salaries, most of the guaranteed salaries, and keep whatever promises that these owners need to keep certain people funded, keep them going. But I don't know. I can't see that number even being real, to be honest with you. It seems more of a marketing business kind of chess piece rather than an actual number.
My understanding with what they've done, so like we got to remember these discussions started with the government over a month ago. They only broke wind last week publicly. From the research I've been doing today, just to try to remember, get my hand wrapped around what I'd read earlier, they're not asking for 150, it's 120 mil, and that's only worst case scenario if the entire season gets canceled. They're looking for like a $30 million up front just to cover the cost of what they're going to lose here right away, up to a potential of $120 million, because the deals that they have in place, I mean, they've got no money coming in. And like, again, you've got a lot of these teams that break even. You know, the Eskimos make $25 million. They probably put out $24 million. So they don't have a lot of reserves. So now you're going to lose your staff. You're going to lose all your trainer staff. Like the Eskimos laid off their 50-year equipment guy. The guy that's been their equipment guy for 50 years got laid off this week because they're trying to figure out how to cut costs because there's no revenue coming in. So when you think about it as a league-wide thing, it's not the CFL themselves going, the CFL needs it. It's like, we need all this money to prop these teams up, because they're going to go through a year where if they don't have revenue, they're going to have to get rid of their staff. And then what do you do next year when you go to start up? You have to try to find, you're going to replace, you're going to start letting go your directors of marketing and all these people, because you're not going to have the money to keep them. So I understand what they're doing. And if it's true that it's like, yeah, this is what we need for sure right now, you know, if we lose half the season, maybe we need $80 million. Can you help us out here? they're a business that are looking for help from the federal government, no different than any other business that is currently running in this country. They're no different. And this is going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the bailouts we're going to start seeing once we figure out what the end game here is going to be. The bailouts that are going to be required by the airline industry, the automotive industry, the manufacturing industry is going to make $150,000 look like not even pocket change. It's going to be the quarter you found in your seat, because the airline industry alone is going to be looking for billions of dollars once this blows over.
Yep.
And if the CFL needs $150 million to guarantee that the CFL continues, okay. I mean, maybe you guys can look at structuring stuff differently so that doesn't happen again. We're in unprecedented times. It's been 100 years since we've had anything like this. I get it. It's caught a lot. It caught everybody flat-footed, whether you're a government, you're a company, you're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, just caught you flat-footed. Learn from it, move forward, but at the end of the day, you're a business looking for help. You're no different than every other small, medium, or large business in this country. So to say they shouldn't get it because they're sports, I don't know, because I'm waiting for the WHL to come out and ask for it. You know, they're going to ask for it for sure. The WHL can't. Their owners are in the same boat. They don't have multi-million-dollar owners that own those junior hockey teams. They're going to be needing some help. So I think it was handled poorly. I think it could have been handled better. I think the CFL could have got ahead of this and made it not seem like such a big deal. And at the end of the day, I don't know. I guess I'm okay with it. Yeah, 150 million's out to lunch, but the 30 to 120 million, depending on what happens in the season, you know, there's nine teams that usually bring in $25 million a year. Well, 9 times 25 doesn't equal 120. It equals a lot more. So this is like, really does seem to me to be like keep things afloat money so that we don't have to completely decimate our league.
Yeah.
Because if you lose that talent that they all have, how do you build that back to keep your league going? You're going to get some of it back probably, but some of it you're not. They're either going to retire, they're going to go to the private sector, they're going to go do their own thing. You know, you got scouts that you got to keep employed. You don't want to lose that structure as a sports franchise. And I get why they're asking. And for me, it's sure. Why wouldn't you? Like, let's be honest. If you have a company and you're in trouble right now, of course you're asking for money, and the CFL is no different.
Yeah. And then you also look at the future revenue that Halifax or the Maritime team is going to add to the CFL. That's going to be a huge boon, especially for a place that hasn't had. It is a football community, and I think it will support football, and I think will be a huge boon too. So that's
the other. Sorry, guys, just one thing before I forget. The article I was reading today as well, I believe it was Dan Barnes in the Sun. The CFL, like, because nobody's really talked about this, but doing some research, I guess, they're not just asking for $120 million and walking away. They've already presented things to help repay that to the government through other ways over time. They're not just looking for a straight $120 million handout, like give me the money and that's it. They've already been talking like, listen, we need this to prop us up. This is what we think we can do to help offset that cost over time. And that's what the CFL, I mean, God, there's one owner has 2 teams in this league. I mean, this is how the CFL works. You know, I'll happily eat a hamburger today that I can pay for tomorrow. I mean, the CFL's been doing that for decades. This is just a different way of doing it. That's a bigger piece of money. So I don't know. They've pulled it off before. So anyways, that's all I had to say about that.
Yeah, no. And to the WHL's point, it's not only the WHL, it's the lower leagues as well are going to face a hit. And that hasn't been talked about enough. But I mean, BCHL, AHL, SHL, some of those other leagues are going to be asking for money too, and you can't blame them, right? Like it's hitting everybody. So I do agree with you on that. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that we need to talk about with this conversation?
I think I've touched on everything I needed to get to.
Jack, what about you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, the one other thing I did kind of want to mention is the difference in the CFL towards the NHL and the other big sports leagues, whether it's the NHL, the NFL, MLB, is the sponsorship model is a lot different as well. The CFL, and I think, Michael, you had brought this up as well when we were talking about economic impact. If you go to the CFL stadiums individually and you look at the sponsorship that runs those local markets, there are the national sponsors like the Tim Hortons, but 80% of that sponsorship is in that town for that team. So it's not, they don't have the giant national sponsors like the big leagues do that pay the league, and then the league distributes that money. Like the Eskimos or the Lions or the Rough Riders or whoever, their money sponsorship is coming locally. So without that coming in, their revenue is basically dried up to nothing. Because it's not like those sponsors are paying, Jim Bob's Donut Shop is not paying the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's their sponsorship money right now. And there's no national sponsorship money that comes back to those teams. So their revenue in the CFL right now is literally at zero. And that's a big thing to think about too when you look at the way the league works compared to others. Is TSN doesn't pay them money unless the games are on TV. So there's no revenue coming in right now to the CFL.
So just on that, would you support the return of the blackout?
No, I don't think the blackout was. Personally, I think the blackout was a disservice to the CFL. Okay. I think it's part of the reasons why you do lose fans, because maybe you live in Edmonton and maybe you're of a family that couldn't afford to go to the games, but then you couldn't even watch the home games. How do you become a fan if you can't watch your team play? That's
true. Yeah, no,
and nothing drives me more nuts than regional NHL blackouts.
Oh,
holy! I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, Kevin, but
no,
holy crap, do regional blackouts piss me off?
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy to me that is, yeah, and it's done in NHL. It really has done an NHL a disservice. And I mean, there's a whole other conversation, but how it's easier to get a Toronto Maple Leaf game in any of the regions that we are in than our local teams is mind-boggling to me. I mean, I understand that in some senses because of the legacy, but from a local perspective, it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. And then the opposite regional blackout. I moved to Revelstoke, and I can't watch Oilers games on Sportsnet.
You can online.
Like, really?
If you get the the Sportsnet online package, you can.
Yeah, I got to pay for it.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That part too.
Yeah, it's paywall. It's all about money. I mean, at the end of the day, any of the decisions that the leagues make is they're trying to force you to get center ice or something where you pay for it, right? But if I'm in Revelstoke, I can't even log into my parents' Sportsnet account in Edmonton and watch it because they're like, oh, no, you're outside of the region. You can't watch this. So it's mind-boggling. Like, if you're trying to grow the game, let the game be accessible. The CFL, that's right back to the CFL with the regional, like the local blackouts. I think that was a disservice. I have talked to somebody whose dad was a 9-time Grey Cup winning coach or GM within CFL, who said blackouts were the dumbest thing ever invented. Because how do I grow my team within my city when most of my city can't watch the game?
Yeah.
And it makes lots of sense. The stadium can only hold so many people.
Yeah, it's true. I hear you. I was just asking because I was a thought because it's so, because of some of the fan bases losing fans, and you don't want to punish them, but that's was why I asked that. But
yeah, and I think in this with the CFL specifically at this time in their history, I think turning off access to the games would be worse than trying to drive them to the venues because I don't think it would work. I think it would have an opposite reaction.
I think they need to try to do something maybe even a little more creative and maybe air games completely on social media as well. Not just being able to watch them on your TSNs or whatever. That should always be an option. But why not just try to address a younger fan base and just have the stream on your phone as well? I think that'd be a really easy, great idea. You just got to click one button, it's there. Like, why not?
I don't do every game. Do a marquee matchup once a week. Hey, this game between the Western top two teams in the West, we're going to put that on. We're going to live stream that on Twitter. Have at her. You get this game for free.
And do a more expansive pregame, postgame type of show where you're getting into the game. Where that's how the NFL has done so. There's so many other things, but the NFL has done so well with that idea. I don't know how the CFL has not capitalized on that. That just doesn't make any sense.
And if you talk to any of those guys on that panel, whether it's Dunnigan or whoever, and that'll be the first thing that comes out of their mouth, that they need to showcase the teams and the players and the game more. And that's not happening because, like we said earlier, if you've got an emotional attachment to something, you're going to watch it. You're going to want to be a part of it. But if you don't create that emotional attachment, who cares, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. All right, let's leave it there or else we'll go till midnight. Thank you guys for coming on. Michael, what are you up to? How do we follow you? What's going on for you right now?
I got some exciting stuff coming down through the pipeline. Of course, I do most of my reporting on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I write for BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, and coming up in about a week and a bit, I'm starting my own podcast through SB Nation. It's called The Live Mic. You'll be able to get it wherever you get your podcast from, be it iTunes, be it anywhere, any single podcast location. Of course, you could also follow me on Twitter at Michael Beck. Michael Beck 56, make it. You're more than welcome to follow along. Some exciting times for me, and it's mostly football content. So if you like that, you're more than welcome to tag along.
Did you interviewed Chase Claypool, did you not?
I did, as a matter of fact. There is a link directly to the SoundCloud as my pinned tweet. I also wrote a couple stories on it. Chase is actually a buddy from training. So go a little ways back with him. I even forced him to sign a picture for me. Threw that up on the wall right behind where all my kind of podcasty background stuff is. So thanks to Chase. He is just an extreme talent. It's cool to see him go to a team that I cover and a team that I've watched for my entire life. So by all means, check that out. The full interview is on Twitter.
Cool.
At my pin tweet, yeah.
All right. Jack, what's going on with what have you got going on? Are you guys going to be doing any Oilers podcasting, or what's going on there?
Yeah, the Oilers YYC podcast, we've obviously drastically reduced how much we're recording because there's not much to talk about other than, Dave and I and Andrew and Pete can absolutely sit and yell at each other for hours on end, which some people apparently actually enjoy when we do. But we'll probably try to get that going once we get a bit more understanding of what's going on. My little side endeavor of the Esks YYC is also kind of on hold. I had grand plans of taking that up a notch this year and actually doing a weekly podcast. So I'm hoping if the CFL does kick in, I will be able to kind of get that up and running. And if I'm really lucky, I can give Michael a call and have him join, because that I think would be a lot of fun to talk CFL with you again, Michael.
That would be my pleasure.
Sweet. In the meantime, you can catch me on Twitter at BigManTry. And I don't tweet as much as I used to, but I'm always happy to talk and share stories and see what's on there. And you can also get me at Esks YYC on Twitter as well. That's the Eskimos podcast. And I may have some news to share on a different stream or different venue that I might be involved with in a few, once the world kind of goes back sort of to normal. But I'll be happy to share that if it turns out once we get to the point where there is regular sports again.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll keep that in mind.
So that's my teaser for the night. I never get to tease, so that's my one teaser for the night.
On the hockey podcast, by the way, Jack, we're going back and reviewing all the drafts, and we're on the 2013 NHL draft, the one of Darnell Nurse.
Ah, yes, that's a good one.
Yes, so we take the top 5, but I think that is probably going to be one of the more fascinating top 5s to look at, I think.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one to look back at. It's the 13 and the 12 draft, both of them were there's definitely some stuff up for debate in there.
Yeah, for sure. I will be back. Have a interview with Renu Bakshi. We're going to be talking about communications for media and business in the time of the pandemic, and we've got a couple of other things going on as well. Follow me, KVOLE, ARD the podcast, as me as a friend on Facebook, etc. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Michael and Jack, and thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.